Hello and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Here's what we're looking at. Chicago's Deputy Mayor for Community Safety, Emmanuel Andre, on his first months in office and goals for the future.
When city government is disorganized, families pay the price.
And Cook County Board of Review Commissioner and former Alderman George Cardenas launches his bid for mayor. He joins us to discuss his vision. First off tonight, attorneys for the former Broadview 6 defendants are calling for a special prosecutor to investigate the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District of Illinois. The lawyers are asking a judge to designate a special counsel to investigate and, if warranted, prosecute members of Andrew Boutros' office following bombshell allegations of grand jury misconduct. They argue Boutros' office appears to be putting all blame for those actions on one prosecutor, but they claim the misconduct runs, quote, much deeper. It comes as a top Democratic lawmaker is calling for a congressional inquiry into Boutros' handling of the case. In response to that, Boutros says he, quote, fully supports an investigation into the Broadview 6 prosecution, saying he's confident no misconduct by the U.S. attorney will be found because, quote, there was none. Older drivers will have a few more years before taking another driving test to prove they're still fit to be on the road. Starting July 1st, a new law kicks in that raises the age at which senior drivers need to take a new road test from 79 to 87 years old when renewing their license. The Secretary of State's office says instead, drivers ages 79 through 86 will still be required to renew their licenses in person and pass a vision screening. Drivers 79 and 80 will renew their license every 4 years and every 2 years for those 81 and up. The Illinois Department of Transportation says Illinois drivers over 75 had a crash rate of 25.5 per 1,000 licensed drivers in the year 2024. That's lower than every other age group. You may have heard of Chicago's newest celebrities, but you haven't heard their names. That's because the newest Piping Plover chicks don't have names yet, but the contest to name them is on. The coalition of bird groups hosting the contest says your entry should reflect Chicago's heritage, culture, and diversity, so no elected officials or businesses. For reference, the names chosen for 2025's chicks were Ferris, Elle, and Bean. Get it? This is the third year Plover couple Imani is seen here, and Sea Rocket have hatched chicks at Montrose Beach. Entries are due by Sunday night. You can visit our website to learn how to submit. Up next, the City Hall official tasked with holistic approach to public safety joins us right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Since his appointment in April, Chicago Deputy Mayor for Community Safety Emmanuel Andre has faced a number of challenges, from how to handle teen takeovers and rising domestic violence cases to aggressive federal immigration enforcement and rising political tensions. Andre is tasked with overseeing the city's public safety agenda at a time when overall crime is on the decline, but while critics of Mayor Brandon Johnson are questioning his administration's approach. Joining us now is Emmanuel Andre, Chicago Deputy Mayor for Community Safety. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Congrats on the new position.
Thank you.
You've been on the job for a couple of months now, stepping in after the abrupt firing of your predecessor, Gary Gatewood. Why were you interested in this role?
You know, when I thought about this role and when I think about the importance of this role, the importance of keeping the city safe and what I might be able to bring to that ecosystem of safety, in many ways, man, I thought this role is just too important. You know, I'm a parent. I have kids, and my kids all the time talk about what it means to be able to navigate the city. And at the end of the day, I want to be a part of making the city safer and continuing some of the progress and some of the successes we've seen. So it was just an urgent call, and I thought it was too important to pass on.
So starting with crime, of course, even though Chicago ended last year with its lowest homicide total in 60 years, they are still up 7.5% so far this year. What would you say is behind that increase?
Yeah, thank you. And listen, and I think in many ways, seeing those homicide numbers go down in many ways is a success. But at no point in time are we celebrating necessarily? Do we wish to be able to say, hey, look, for those especially who've been directly impacted by those losses and how that lingers on? So we realize some of the real challenges. Some of the things that we say, especially right now, being that it is the middle of the summer, how these numbers continue to fluctuate. But what I think stands out is the consistency in terms of that we are seeing that there is a steady decline, although we do see some increase in the homicide numbers and some increase in the amount of shootings. But when you look at some of the rest of the data, especially around violent crimes, how that continuously declines, data around carjackings, around robberies, all of that is very, very consistent. Now, again, we're not happy with where things are, but we are encouraged that the overall strategy is working, and this is something that takes several years to continue on. But we're uber focused and making things better.
So that 7.5% increase, it also comes at a time when homicides in New York are down 21% so far this year and down 10% in LA. They start from much lower points than Chicago does as well. What would you say is behind that sort of big city disparity?
Yeah, I think even when you look at that 7.5% increase, so if you look at the map of the city, we're 77 communities, but very desperate in a lot of ways. So we have seen a spike in certain neighborhoods, and we're trying to focus in on those neighborhoods that we've seen that spike in. But if you look at the overall city, our homicide numbers are down in the overall city, but there has been a spike in a few neighborhoods that we continue to work on and be able to help turn that tide. So we're really lucky about just sort of the amount of people who we have working on this to be able to make this more of a holistic effort to be able to turn that tide.
Do you see anything different that those cities are doing versus what Chicago's doing?
I think we have a lot of similarities, to be honest with you, although Chicago is just a different infrastructure in some ways, but we do have a lot of similarities in terms of what we're seeing. So in terms of the continued downward trend, we started with more than the other cities, but we do have more similarities, I think, than differences at this point.
So you have a background in restorative justice work. Before joining city government, you founded Circles and Ciphers, which uses hip hop and restorative justice practices to engage young people. Of course, we also know that you came from the Cook County Public Defender's Office as well. How would you say that work in restorative justice shapes your approach to community safety?
Yeah, I think in many ways it helps inform that. So my approach is one, and even when we look at this summer, right, what does it look like? Safety, to be able to actively define safety. Safety as being about belonging, and not just the absence of violence, but about belonging. And restorative practices, I think, is an approach that always asks, well, what is it that we would want for our own child if they were caught in the middle of something? How should that guide? So it's more so a philosophy of how do we want things to be and how do we want to be in right relationship with each other, and the importance of relationship no matter in what, and the importance of words like healing means. What does it mean to be able to heal through a situation so we can continue to see the long-term effects of when we have healing versus very narrow approaches to safety. And I think some of that has always framed just sort of the vision and the work. And because of my work, because of my background, I've been able to work with victims and survivors in addition to people who've been accused. And that helps all frame just sort of the way I approach things, to be able to say, look, at the end of the day, we want to be a better community through whatever crisis happens, and what's needed to be able to tap that and move that forward. So that philosophy, I think, helps a lot.
So so-called teen takeovers, these are, of course, the unauthorized mass gatherings of young people. They sometimes turn into dangerous situations. They become more commonplace in Chicago. We know that CPD has been responding to quite a few of them, but also other cities are experiencing this too. What tactics do you think the city should be deploying to quell this issue?
Yeah, I think the city should continue to do some of the stuff that we know that's working, right? So this idea of, and even this idea of framing, right? There's bunch of pushback, teen gatherings, teen takeovers, teen trends, and then you might even have some people use words I wouldn't agree with, like mobs and things like that. I think it says a lot. But I do think what's being asked is this idea of, again, belonging. Where is it that young people can go to be able to feel like they can gather in a safe manner? That's what we care about, making sure it happens safely. So this is not necessarily a new phenomenon, right? young people have been gathering for years, for decades, I would argue. Now, we do have some new points in that phenomenon, right? We didn't have social media in the way, and we're not coming off of a historic event like COVID in the way that we are now. So that is some of the changes that's needed in terms of how do we actively utilize this day and now to be able to have that impact? How do we continue to increase just sort of spaces for young people to go to be able to be in community with each other? I think a couple of months back, the mayor's office hosted a big gathering over at Navy Pier. I saw over 1,500 young people. How do we continue to offer that? Even this weekend as I speak, there's going to be around 31 activations that we're supporting in some way that we're hopeful is going to be able to engage well over 40,000 people throughout the city. So we're excited about being able to be proactive in a way to be able to help inform, especially the gatherings that we're particularly concerned about, those that may, for whatever reason, turn violent or anything like that. So so we're doing that in addition to, I know people in my team, we meet twice weekly just around this issue, working with city government partners all across the spectrum to be able to make an impact on this issue.
So the city ended its contract with ShotSpotter back in 2024, and the mayor is convinced, based on a variety of studies, including ones that we have covered here, that the gunshot detection systems do not work, that it does not make Chicagoans safer. But a majority of the city council, they remain convinced that such a system is necessary. How do you plan on navigating that issue?
Yeah, I think, my understanding, the mayor's convinced about ShotSpotter, and my understanding, this is still open right now, and it's open, there's an open procurement that's happening right now in real time. So I do think that the mayor still remains aligned with wanting to making sure that we have great technology that works that's going to help further inform public safety. But so that's where we're at right now, and that's what we're excited about, being able to get to that space. But as it pertains to specifically ShotSpotter, I think there's been tons of research around that in terms of around the issues associated with that. So the mayor is very clear on his position.
Are there technologies that you think Chicago could be investing in for stronger community safety?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I do think that we have seen an evolution of where we're at in terms of technology. But I think what's being asked right now is how do we properly evaluate those technologies, right? Chicago should not be the guinea pig for all technologies, the testing ground. So can we put together an infrastructure that'd be able to properly evaluate technologies to make sure that Chicagoans are getting the absolute best. So I think that's one thing that's absolutely needed. So we're definitely not saying no to technology, not at all. If anything, we want to make sure it's effective, efficient, to be able to move public safety forward.
And of course, Chicago's frequently found itself in conflict with the Trump administration over immigration, local governance. What concerns do you have about federal intervention in local public safety matters?
Well, we continue to have some of those shared concerns about broad federal overreach, to be very frank with you, and we've seen what happened a couple of months ago. We've seen how that's impacted Chicago as a community, as Chicago continues to stand tall in its position, and the impact that we've had about that. So around that, so we continue to stand though and firm with the community around that. But we absolutely are concerned about broad federal overreach when it comes to issues of that. 15
seconds left. At the end of your, maybe first year, what would you say success looks like for you?
I think at the end of the first year, success would be increasing belonging within the city, right? This idea that we are 77 communities but one city. Can we have metrics that we can look at the end of the year that goes beyond just how many shootings happen to be able to say, hey, we're a safer city.
Okay, well, we'll see you before that year is up, I'm sure. New Deputy Mayor for Community Safety, Emmanuel Andre, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for your time.
You bet.
Bye.
Up next, meet the newest candidate running for mayor of Chicago.
WTTW News coverage of policing and police reform is supported by the Joyce Foundation.
Chicago's already crowded mayoral field has a new entrant. Former Chicago Alderman and current Cook County Board of Review Commissioner George Cardenas has just announced his bid. Over more than 2 decades in elected office, Cardenas has been an ally to former mayors Daley, Emanuel, and Lightfoot before resigning from the city council after his election to the Board of Review. Now, the former auditor and management consultant says he wants to bring his experience to the 5th floor of City Hall. Joining us now with more is George Cardenas, Commissioner on the Cook County Board of Review and now candidate for mayor. Thank you for joining us. Welcome back.
Thanks for the invite.
So, as we mentioned, already sort of a crowded field. Several candidates are running, having made formal announcements. Several others that we've heard of are expected to jump in. Why did you decide to get into this race?
Well, let me just first say that I think it's welcoming that a lot of people want to talk about the future of Chicago. And let's have a really thorough and strong debate about what that looks like. And everybody should bring their plans and debate them, and let's get the best ideas in there, implement them, and make the city what it should be. My reason was simple. It was a transition in my mind that when I was doing some of the analysis when it came to property taxes, I wanted to understand a little deeper in terms of what's driving that, not just the overassessments, but the cost and increased cost on taxpayers over and over again and year after year without any kind of plan of how to control that. So I decided to kind of look at not just the financials and the assessments in Cook County, but also the financials of the city. And I launched the exploratory committee just because of that. And what I found was serious, serious issues in spending in particular. Spending grew 54% from 2019 to 2026. Let's just put it in very basic math. $10.7 billion was the budget in 2019, and the budget in 2026 was $16.6 billion. If you account for inflation, this is just core, which does not include food and energy, you're talking about 27%, which is about $3 billion or so. So you're now looking at the difference of $3 billion, not including pensions and also debt, which is about $1.5 billion. The difference is $1.5 billion overspending because there's nothing to account for that.
Okay. So you've been on the Board of Review, because talking about a lot of things here, since 2022. Before that, you were a member of Chicago City Council from
Correct.
2003.
Yes.
And as you've just said, you were running on a campaign of fiscal discipline, government efficiency. What do those terms mean to you?
It just means you got to manage better, and this is not about cutting anything. This is about management. This is about contracts to see are they performing, are they doing the things that they're supposed to be doing? Are you paying for the services you're getting? And that's just kind of going to a progression of things that any accountant, someone with some sort of financial, acumen would really get to. We all do it in our families. And I go through this with my daughters. Someone's got Hulu, and they got Netflix, and they got Prime, and they got all these other apps. And I'm like, they're movies, they have the same thing. Why do
you need all of those?
Do you need all of those? And it's very basic. So in the city, it's very simple. You got 20 different procurement systems, and they all buy silo products that we all use. They're all used in the city. And I think we ought to bring that into a more managed, programmatic type of decision making.
Do you think by making a tweak here and a tweak there in, for example, procurement and other ways, is that going to save the money that the city really needs to save to fill the holes?
My analysis was just on healthcare alone. If we really put pen to paper, it's about $245 million. On contracts, if I go to any departments, whether it's aviation or streets and sand, I can definitely get to a reduction of 10%. Just on going through a contract reformation and
just going through contracts, not cutting anything.
Not even cutting anything, not at all. And I also did an analysis of also what we spend into the non-for-profit sector. And what I found was really disparate systems. We all doing great work, but there's nothing really into sort of a cohesive strategy to solve the problems that Chicagoans are facing. And I think the team problems really caught my attention. So I came up with something that I thought could be useful for Chicago, which is a teen takeover problem. And I'm going to put something that is parenting matters, more of a foundational plan to support families, in a very programmatic way, a paid participation, structured engagement, two-generation strategy to connect youth with the caregiver. And we need to bring that in and spend the money wisely because these teens need our help.
Okay, and yes, we just heard from our Deputy Mayor for Community Safety on this very issue. In your announcement, you talked about moving to Chicago as an immigrant and struggling commuting to school on the southwest side. You said that your struggle reflects that.
Yeah, a lot of many Chicagoans face that daily, yes.
Yes, well, you said that, you know, your struggle reflects that of many average Chicagoans. Tell us more about that struggle.
Well, correct. I mean, when I was young, I mean, I obviously went to Lane Tech High School, not far from here, and I had to take 2 buses. Brutal winters, which is Chicago, at that time even more than now. But also as a teen, facing in some of the neighborhoods really the toughest environments. You were talking about Little Village and Pilsen in those years. You know, the gang culture was very intense, and I had to navigate through all of that. And this is why I decided to join the military, just to get away from it all, and then come back strong and go and get, you know, get my future, which is go to school, get a degree, and, you know, join the workforce, which I did very successfully. So I'm proud of that. But many Chicagoans face that. Not all of them get to make that in those decisions. And I want to be able to bring that into focus and say, you know, why don't we do more of an analysis of what's going on in some of these neighborhoods and help these young men like I did at that time, which we don't do enough.
You've also made public safety a top issue. The city's crime rate, it is at historically low levels, again, as we just discussed. Why does public safety remain one of your top issues?
You know, there's the thing. People don't feel safe, to be honest with you. And I have these conversations in downtown and in the neighborhoods, and somehow the perception is they don't feel safe. They still don't feel safe. Crime has gone down, and I don't know if that's just metrics that people are getting or not getting or not reporting anymore. So I don't really know, but I know that people don't feel safe, and especially downtown. People are not coming as they used to. Tourism is down. So to me, without safety, you miss a lot of things. People leave, families leave, investment slows, and the city shrinks, as I said. That's something that I want to prevent. I want the city to grow. My whole thing is this city has to grow to keep up with the necessities and the services that we provide on a daily basis in Chicago.
The city voters elected Brandon Johnson in 2023, of course, a member of the Democratic Party's more progressive wing, Lori Lightfoot before him. Do you think Chicago is prepared? Do you think Chicagoans want to elect a more moderate Democrat?
Look, I think Chicago is ready for someone to govern. I think Chicago wants someone who knows the numbers, who can bring some sense into all of the spending that's happening, into the governance structure of it all, to someone that's going to take charge, is going to make decisions, is going to make good decisions on contracts and on services and how to rein in spending, how to slow down the wage growth that is going to then keep, you know, put a lot of pain in pension pressures later on. All of that has to be someone who is competent enough to understand the whole ecosystem and do something about it. I talked about you know, the grid system and how they promised us to save more. Well, the street sanitation department is spending more, about 25% more than they did in 2019 now. And how is that happening? We were supposed to be saving money. Ward yards remain empty. Superintendents reporting to empty buildings. You know, we have a recycling rate of 3%. You know, why is that? And it's just management. We got to manage this whole ecosystem, make it better.
Recent property tax assessments, of course, they've driven up tax bills for Chicago homeowners. Some of the largest increases falling on the south and west side communities. As you know, right, you're a member of the Board of Review, which is responsible for ensuring fair property valuations.
Correct.
What do you think should be done to reduce the burden on homeowners?
Well, definitely better assessments, of course, but lowering the cost of government, because at the end of the day, you know, government goes to the well all, you know, over and over again, which is property taxes. This is the most, you know, the most salient revenue source that there is. That's what they rely on. That's what they go to, and I think that needs to stop. I mean, the trend line for increases in property taxes is just not sustainable. Whether it's CPS, whether it's a park district with the city of Chicago or Cook County, which has not raised their tax and their levy, but other entities have.
Okay, that's where we'll have to leave it. George Cardenas, Commissioner of the Cook County Board of Review, also candidate for Mayor of Chicago. I'm sure we'll be talking to you again. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Of course. And that is our show for this Wednesday night. Stay connected with our reporters and what they're working on by following us on Instagram at WTTW Chicago. And join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10 for Chicago Tonight, opening day in Jackson Park. We'll have an inside look at the Obama Presidential Center as it opens on the city's south side, broadcasting live from the center's campus. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe. Have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports educational initiatives in the legal profession.